Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm. I'll be your host. So today I'm joined with Dr. Kimberly Harms. How you doing today, Kim?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Kirk?
Doing wonderful, doing wonderful. Well, glad to have you in the show. I love this topic. Maybe the listeners won't. We'll see. I know it's kind of one of those weird topics, but in my opinion, it is one of the most impactful topics in my work that nobody talks about. And so, I really want to have you in the show because it is. I will talk about it. But anyway, Kim, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Well, I started out as a dentist. I was a dentist for 30 years until my good hand I gave up and I had some nerve damage and I had to suddenly quit. And I had worked a lot in dentistry and in leadership. I was the first woman president of the Minnesota Dental Association. I worked as a national spokesperson. So I was very busy in that field. And then I couldn't work anymore. So I had to rethink, what am I going to do now? Right. I was a primary breadwinner of my family. My husband was sick. So I started looking, okay, so what do I do now? Second part of my life. And during that time, I became very interested in this area for women anyway, between menopause and death. You know, you're looking at both sides. What the heck are you going to do? Then I became a widow and my husband passed away. So what I've done is I worked very hard to figure out what to do during this time. And I realized one of the most important things that we're lacking in is preparing for death, graduating from life with all of our stuff in order. And if my husband passed away and I noticed some things that I would have improved upon. So I became a grief counselor, a death doula, a civil mediator, and a life coach. And I've written several books. And I'm focused really now on helping people understand that life is short, the clock is ticking. We need to prepare the next generation to thrive without us. And we need to get going and start doing that like right now.
What's a death doula? I never heard of that.
A death doula is someone that helps people navigate their death. And again, this is an appointment we all have, but we don't like to talk about it. I'm 68, so I'm looking at it maybe a little sooner than most people. And a death doula helps navigate that path. It helps bring peace to people as they go through the process. It helps normalize a process of death because it's normal. We don't like to think about it, but it's normal. My specialty, the area that I love, is legacy, leaving a legacy, writing legacy videos, books. The very first Valentine was written to be delivered posthumously. So, and you know what the impact that one had. So I help people write Valentines to their loved ones to be delivered after their death in a legacy binder. And that's what I've been focusing on most of my time lately.
Nice. That's awesome. I love this. It's funny. It's one of those areas that no one wants to talk about. It's so impactful. I mean, when I work with clients, I'd say one time, I've only seen this happen once, where when somebody dies, the family doesn't tear each other apart. Only once.
Exactly.
Every other time, they just tear each other apart and they go after each other. People come from, they've never talked to before. The missing uncle that never showed up, they're showing up to have their hand out and everyone's just at each other. Like, why does that happen? Like, it's not always about the money because sometimes there's not enough money to go around, but it's more than that. Like, why does that happen?
Right. They weren't prepared. And this is a problem. First of all, we don't like to admit we're going to die, but we are. It's going to happen. And we need to make sure my legacy, I've got two living children and I have six grandchildren. And my legacy to them is to help them to thrive when I go. I don't want them fighting. And 75% of deaths involve some sort of conflict. One of the conflicts is, how did we die? My husband, fortunately, before he died, filled out a healthcare directive that we should all have filled out that tells us how we want to die, because many times those arguments are about how did they die? If you brought them home to die in hospice, many people will accuse you of knocking them off early, right? You're going to let them die early. If you bring them into the hospital, they might have to suffer more. It's a crazy question, but we have to take care of that. We have to take the responsibility to prepare our loved ones for a time when we're no longer here. And that involves getting all of your affairs in order, clearly articulating where everything goes, and making sure that they know that you love them after you're gone.
That's a quote. That's a quotable. If you bring him to the hospital, they might suffer more.
They might. You know,
That's
my husband had congestive heart failure. We lost a son to suicide, so we've had a lot of issues that we've had to deal with. And my husband died of congestive heart failure, and he was in the hospital, and I was trying to keep him there to get better, right? He realized he wasn't getting better. He wanted to come home, and it was his choice, and he did a healthcare directive that says, "I want to die at home. Do not take me back to the hospital." Now, he might have lived a couple of weeks longer in the hospital. They would have put him on a respirator. That's not what he wanted. He wanted to die, and he died very, very peacefully at home. And because I knew that was the way he wanted to go, I was able to help navigate that. It was one of the most precious times of my life as well. So we need to make that plan and make our wishes known to our family so they're not fighting over how we die.
yeah. It's funny. I mean, you bring up a lot of different issues. How you die is one that I really hadn't spent. I've spent time with myself, but I hadn't spent too much time like because most people don't want to talk about like how you
Right.
die, but certainly after is always the topic of discussion. Like what happens after.
Right.
Um, so what are let's kind of go through it. So preparing for death, or how you die. What should people be thinking about? Like what are the areas that people should really focus on to
Yeah.
prepare?
Well, right now, while you're healthy is the best time to start working on it. The first one is build up your legacy. What is your legacy? Is your legacy? Everyone can give a legacy of love or education, or what are you leaving behind to the people that you love? What's your legacy? Think about that and start doing it intentionally. The second part is talk about the fact that you're going to die. And we don't like to do that, but make it fun. I mean, I have a little, write up a little invitation, like come to my death talk, we're going to make it fun. We're going to talk about what happens after I die. And that's not only important for money and all the transfer of material things, it's also important for couples. What if one person dies? Usually one goes and there's one left. More often it's a woman, but it could be the man as well. What's going to happen when that happens? My family and I talked openly about my husband. My husband Jim is quite the extrovert. I am more of an introvert. I plan. I could be alone, but he's an extrovert. And if I went first, he would have to get married pretty quick. We all know that. So why not talk about that before? My family knows it, my girls know it, that if he died, he's going to get married. The only thing that I did kind of put some limitations on is I said he could not look for a wife until my funeral. Then it's free. It's open game after my funeral, but until then, he's not allowed to look. But we have to talk about those things because how many times does that happen? One member of the couple dies, the other one gets lonely, finds a spouse, and that just the rest of the family goes nuts, right? That happens all the time. So we have to talk about what's going to happen because it is going to happen. And then what we need to do is to um, get our all of our affairs in order. Get your will, get your healthcare directive, have a letter of intent that tells people why you're planning what you planned. If you have a will that lists everything, how it's going to go, it's also a good idea to write a letter of intent that explains why you did that. Maybe someone's going to get a little more money than another. Maybe they helped you when you were sick and you want to write that in a letter of intent. So people are just not going to assume because that's what happens, right? People start assuming that person had undue influence and they got more money, or that person did this, or that person that did that. Take care of all the guesswork. Write it in a letter so everybody knows why you're doing what you're doing, and have a plan for getting rid of all your other stuff that's not listed in the will. What are you going to do with all the rest of your stuff? And first of all, try to get rid of your stuff as much as you can before you die, because as much as it pains me to tell you this, my kids don't want my stuff. It's awful. It's an awful feeling, but they don't want my stuff. So I have to get rid of my stuff because they don't want it. So try to do that beforehand. And then the last thing is get your emotional baggage taken care of. Forgive the people that you need to forgive. Apologize when you need to apologize. Reconcile before it's too late. Get that emotional baggage taken care of, because those are the things that will haunt your children for the rest of their lives if you haven't taken care of that.
Yeah, you raised some interesting points, and I'm of two minds of this one. I've gone back and forth on this, and one is, like old school, you didn't tell anybody what you thought, and you might leave a letter or something after, but you didn't discuss it. Like you didn't discuss money. Like I'm a Northeast Yankee, like you didn't talk about money, you didn't talk about religion, you didn't talk about politics. Like you just things you never talked about. But when it comes to money. like talking about that beforehand, it's easier to have the conversation and to discuss why. But then people, they're weird until you die. Like it doesn't, like some people can just they'll feel slighted, but you do it after, and they're like, there's always this unsolved. Well, why did this happen? Why did like my dad passed a number of years ago, and my family just I don't know, just it just got weird and it just got bad as it does with most families. Um, but I knew what his wishes were because I had a lot of conversation with him. But he didn't have the conversation with other people. He had it with me. So now they're relying on me to translate that, and then they have to believe me. And then, of course, like he just did things differently. It was like me with finance, my sister with health, my mother with whatever. Like, but he compartmentalized stuff. And so like we just had to trust the other person. Of course, when people die, nobody trusts anybody.
Right.
So it's this weird dynamic of like, do you tell people before or do you put it in a letter for after? Like, what have you seen as kind of like a best practice?
I think it's good to have a family meeting and make it funny. Like Mother's Day. It's your Mother's Day gift to me to talk to me about when I die. And you don't even have to say, I don't say when I die because people don't like that. A future. Let's talk about the future. What's going to happen in the future? Have that discussion with everyone there and kind of record it because people remember different things. They might be sitting in the same room, but sometimes they remember different things. So like a little, just record it on your phone. If you're uncomfortable with that, a letter of intent is a wonderful way to do it. Write down like a long letter of intent. Talk about your health issues, talk about the other things, anything that might cause a conflict after you die, write it out yourself in a letter of intent so that those are your words, not the translation through someone else that you might be suspicious of. Because then all of a sudden, if you're suspicious of that person, you're going to be bitter against that person. And then the whole family falls apart. So write a letter of intent and remember that your job, our job, my job, is to make sure that my daughters love each other as much as they do now after I'm gone. And my daughters both happen to be attorneys. And so before my husband was still alive when we did our will, we had both of them read over it. We said, here's our will. There it is. And we don't have details of the money because you never know how much money is going to be there because I could end up in a nursing home and it's going to all be gone, right? We kind of talk about percentages is how we do it. But we gave him the will, said, this is a will, speak now or forever hold your peace. Because when we sign this, that's it. You don't have any more, you can't talk about it. You can't discuss it once we sign it. What I also did is I had jewelry that was not in the will. And I sat down with both daughters and I had, well, you pick one, you pick the other. And we wrote it all down as an addendum to the will. So that was all straightened out. So try to predict what, it might be grandma's glass jar. Who knows? Find out what's important and find out what people want and have a conversation about it because it's going to happen. And what you'll find when you have those conversations is when it does happen, you're more prepared. Because first of all, we have to admit, I have one daughter that can talk about it forever. I have one daughter that says, no, Mom, I don't want to talk about you being dead. But at least because we had some of that conversation, she knows it's going to happen. I even talked to my grandchildren about the time when I'm going to go. And when they lost their pop-up, they were very upset. And I know it works. And the reason I know it works is I had a conversation with my granddaughter. She was 7 years old a couple of years ago. And she looked up at me and she goes, Nana. And I said, yeah, Heidi. She said, if Pop-Pop dies, or excuse me, if what happens to Pop-Pop happened to you. And I said, you mean if I died? And she said, yeah, Nana, if you died. And I said, okay, Heidi, what happens if I die? She said, if you die, can we still go to Disney World? And I said, yes. And then I put money in the will. I specified money in the will for them to go on a trip because who knows how old they'll be at the time, for a family trip for them to go and to celebrate my life and to thrive and have fun. I put that in my will based on that conversation. But that conversation shows me that she knows I'm going to die at some point. And when it happens, I hope it's going to be easier for her to grieve. She's going to grieve, but I'm hoping to make it easier for her so it's not as difficult.
You know, I've I haven't gone down the rabbit hole too much with this, but I've at times I have, and I've seen you look at different cultures and they deal with death differently. And I think in the US, we don't know how to deal with death. We don't have a process of grieving. Um, I've always thought of it as people fight each other because it's misdirected grief that they haven't dealt with, and they don't know how to direct it, so they just attack each other. And and ends up it's over some tchotchke in the house that nobody really cares about. But you took advantage of me. I need this, and it's just they don't. It's people don't understand what's happening, but it happens to everybody, right?
Right.
Um, so one thing I've always been curious about is, we grieve when somebody passes, but some cultures celebrate the person's life. And of course, it's sad, but it's a different way to look at it rather than, I mean, of course you're sad, but like people, I think around here, they feel uncomfortable celebrating somebody's life.
Right. Right.
It's like they feel sad about the person's life. It's like, well, celebrate it. Like, was it tragic or did they just die in their sleep? Like, is it, it should be celebrated. So, I mean, I don't know if that's possible, but it just seems to me like that's something that would be a better way to deal with it. I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts? Like, have you kind of looked into this?
Absolutely. I lost a son, it took me 10 years to recover from that one. But I'm at the point now where I can celebrate. I had him for 19 years. In my life, I can say, wow, my life is so much richer that he was in it. And my life was so much richer that my husband was in it. However, we do have to go through the grieving process because that's just part of our human nature. And the grieving process, there are actually tasks of mourning, which I just love because they're tasks. That means you get to work through them, right? And the first one is to accept the loss. They're called Worden's tasks of mourning. Accept the loss. The second one is to process the grief. And that's the hard part. Grief takes time to process, and we all process it differently. Some people, I know a lot of people that have lost children, some of them never recover. They can never get their life back. But you have to process through it and you have to fight to process through it. It doesn't come by itself. And then you just have to kind of adapt to your new reality, especially as widows, you're adapting to, I'm all by myself in my house. Nobody's there to know where I'm at. And then finally, and this is the great step, the final step is to take that life and put it somewhere in your heart that you can celebrate it, just as you said. You can celebrate the life. You can be happy that you had the wonderful opportunity of having that person in your life. There are groups around the world that celebrate deaths even better than others. In fact, I just found out that the Methodists had something back about 100 years ago called a happy death. And they would record in the paper the last words of people, and they would celebrate their death, their lives and their death, but they call it a happy death. Now, of course, if you're of a religious persuasion, I happen to be Christian, I think I'm going up to heaven, I'm going to meet my family, so I'm not too worried about that. But depending on what your culture is, depending on what your faith is, you're going to see death differently. But I think that for me, one of the best things you can do for everybody around you is to celebrate the life that you lost after the grieving process. When you work through it quickly, fight through it, and then celebrate it. I had a situation that happened to me that really showed me this, and that was after my son died. One of my cousins, my husband's cousin, came up to me and he was waving his finger in my face. I was in that zombie stage of grief. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't eat. I was walking around like a zombie, which as you know, we do sometimes. He started just putting his finger, yelling at me. He said, "Don't you ever let your remaining children feel that they are not enough. Don't you do that to them." And the reality was he lost his brother at the same age. And he felt that his parents could only focus on the grief for their lost son, and they could no longer attend to their living children. And I was going there. I mean, I was going down. I was at the bottom of that grief pit. I was going there. And I realized I had these two daughters that I loved so much, and a husband that had just had a liver transplant. He was sick. And I had to fight my way out. I had to be determined to fight. And it wasn't easy. It took years, but it's so much better to live on the other side of the grief pit. It's so much better to live in joy and to be able to, I have 6 grandchildren now. I can love them all right in the moment. I'm not still wearing that shroud that I wore for many years that prevents you from enjoying life, and then also brings other people down as well because you affect everybody you're with. So my recommendation is to fight, 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 fight that grief pit and think about all the people that are around you. And it's a joyful thing, not only for them, but for you. It's so much more joyful to be out of that pit than it is to be stuck in the mud.
So how do you know when you're through the grieving process? It's not like it's laid out as if you do these 10 steps and
Yeah.
you're done. So like, how do you know when you're done grieving?
Um, when you're done grieving, I think you can actually live in the present. All those people that have been through grief, it kind of keeps this shroud on you. You're walking around and everything you see is through that filter of grief, and having lost a son, I'll tell you that for many years, I would count children. That person has 3 children. I only have 2. I wish I had 3. If that person has 1 child, they seem to be okay. I mean, your brain goes crazy. Grief kind of causes you to be a little crazy, right? And by working and focusing and just kicking and screaming your way out, and I got help, and I'm treated for depression. My mother and son both took their own lives, so hello, it's in my family, so I'm treated for depression. And I think the time that I found out that I was out of the grief pit was when I could live with that joy in my heart at an occasion, any occasion. I can go to weddings now. I can go to funerals now. And I'm thinking of the person that died or the person that's getting married. I'm not thinking about, my loss or losses that I've had. And sometimes when you're out of that grief pit, sometimes you fall back in. So I wish I could tell you better news than that, but sometimes you fall back in and you have to fight your way out. And I think especially for men, my husband did not get treated for depression after our son died. And his heart, he had a liver transplant right before my son died. And before you get a liver transplant, they're not going to give it to you if your heart's bad, right? So his heart checked out as great. My son died, our son died, and within a year and a half, he had a quadruple bypass surgery and a valve replaced. His heart just, fell apart, literally. And I do believe much of it is from untreated grief. He would not succumb. He would not admit that he had to fight it. He would not admit that he had it. He thought he'd just get over it. And I really do believe that it hastened his death because he was just not wanting to get it treated. So get it treated if you need it to be treated. Get it treated and fight. Don't think it's something that's just going to happen. It's not stages. You have to fight your way out of it. It's tasks. That's why they're tasks of mourning. You got to work your way out of it. And some people never get out. So we can't judge another person's grief because I know a lot of people that can never get out. But please do your best to try, because this is a much better place to live than down at the bottom of that pit.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of men don't share their feelings. They feel like
Right.
they have to be stoic and not show their feelings because that's just the way they were raised. I know I was raised that way, like
Yes.
never let anyone see you struggle. Like it was just kind of beaten into me. And I know a lot of other people too at that age, but, well, let's kind of talk about leaving a legacy. So what should that look like? I mean, you kind of touched on a few things, and I'd love to hear you kind of elaborate because I think when most people do their estate planning, they're like, "Oh, where do you want your money to go?" "Oh, I want my money to go all these places." But it's usually more than just money. So, what does it really mean to leave a legacy?
Well, your legacy is every interaction you have with every person you have. And when you're leaving a legacy to your family, you take a look at what skills do you have that you can leave behind. There are so many skills. I mean, legacies, there's thousands of them. The most important one is love. Everyone needs to feel that their parent loves them. We all know what happens when you don't. You want to be loved and accepted. So show your love. And that involves a forgiveness and reconciliation, all those things we talked about before. Show your love. Get rid of your ego. That's the biggest barrier. Get rid of your ego and give love to people. Don't worry about your ego. The second thing I think is to know that there are things like art or hard work. My husband grew up on a farm with 13 brothers and sisters. All of them knew how to work hard. They all knew the value of hard work. And you know what? They were happy when they worked. I mean, wow, what a skill is that to teach us to be happy when we're working? That's a great legacy to pass on. You might pass on the legacy of managing your money well. That's a legacy that you can pass on to your kids. Take a look at what you have learned. And I have learned so much stuff in my life. Some of it was hard. I mean, I went through a lot of loss. So what can I do with that loss? I can teach my family how to deal with their own losses. I can show my family how to deal with their own losses. I have 2 suicides in my family. Resilience is a big deal. My son took his life 45 minutes after a girlfriend broke up with him. Resilience is a big deal for me. So I'm trying to teach my children that when they get yelled at on the baseball team, or they get something happens to them in their life, I come over and I say, you know what? You need to take in the good information and you need to be able to kind of block off that negativity and not take everything personally. You need to realize failure is something that we all do. Those are the legacies that we pass on to the next generation with the goal that they are going to thrive after we're gone and thrive emotionally, not just financially. Financial is good too. It's always nice to leave a little bit there too, but emotionally, they're going to be able to thrive and manage their life. And so you don't want to leave conflict because if you don't have a plan, if you don't have your all of your affairs in order and everything in a plan, the legacy you're going to leave is chaos and conflict right when your family is struggling with grief. And that's an explosive combination, chaos, conflict, and grief. That doesn't work well together. So try to avoid that by leaving all of your affairs in order and thinking about what's going to happen after you die.
Yeah, and I know, it's funny. I was listening to a podcast and somebody brought this frame and I thought it was really interesting. And I think most people want to be remembered, right? They want to leave a legacy. They want people to remember them. That's why they put names on buildings.
Yeah.
Like I got a lot of money, I want you to remember me. But you think like 100 years from now, none of those names are going to be there. So you're really not going to be remembered. And if you go further out hundreds of years, unless you're really a horrible person like a Hitler type, like you're just not going to be remembered, like unless you're president or something, it's just not going to happen. So, what can people do to um to be remembered by more than just their money? Like what can people do to most people think, well, I need to do my will, I need to show where my money is, but like what other things can people come up with to really leave a legacy to like next generation so they can get to know who this person was?
I think the most important one is love and give them the skills they need to survive. That's one of the most important ones. There are many legacies. For instance, for my son, I wanted to leave a legacy for him. He was only 19 when he died, and he was a brilliant student. He was at Columbia University, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant student, and he loved books. So I was able to work with Books for Africa. I had a dear friend that was on the board, so we co-founded 65 libraries in Rwanda that are full of books that people are learning from and computers, and we've seen lots of wonderful things happen through that. There are many, many, many things you can do to honor people in a way that's productive. And it's wonderful for me to think that, he's being remembered in another country. But those are not necessary. I'm a little bit of an overachiever, so I kind of have to do things a little more than most people do. But the biggest memory, I mean, remember your how many of us have a beloved grandmother or grandfather that taught us things, taught us how to fish, spent time with us? That's how we're remembered. And we're remembered in the hearts and minds of the people that knew us. And frankly, I don't think it really matters the people that did know you. So what if they remember you? I mean, what the heck? Being remembered in the hearts and minds of the people that you leave behind is, I think, one of the best things you can do. And it might not even be your family. You can affect other people as well and the groups that you're involved in. There's so many opportunities out there to help. And for us in America, we have the means to be helpful. So look outside of your own. And I think I work with widows quite a bit because as widows, we have to kind of like, what's our purpose in life now, right? We've got, we don't know what we're going to do with ourselves. There's so many things out there that can give you joy, and you get more joy, truthfully, from giving. It's a double-edged, you give something and it comes right back. So you give more joy giving, but just get out there and find something you like. If you're a good golfer, teach people to golf. If you're, if you want to teach people to read, it's one of the most wonderful things you can do. So many things out there you can do to bring joy. And if you don't want to go outside your own family, you don't have to. Just bring joy to the people around you. And I think that's the best legacy we can leave.
That's great. Well, as we kind of wrap it up, Kim, what are some final thoughts you can leave our listeners with? This has been great. I appreciate you kind of sharing. I think, this is a topic that it doesn't come up enough. People don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. It's scary. It doesn't feel comfortable, but yet it's so important to do.
Right.
What are some final thoughts you can leave our listeners with?
The final thought is the four things, get your legacy ready, get your affairs in order, talk about death, and get your emotional affairs in order. And remember, the clock is ticking. The time to get ready is now. You don't want to wait until you're sick to get ready. Then it's a chore. Do it now.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kim. Where can people find more about you?
They can find me on my website, drkimberlyharms.com or rethinkingdeath.life.
Awesome. Well, Kimberly, I really appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your wisdom with us. Much appreciated, and we'll put that link in the show notes. So thanks again.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirk.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. Mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room. All right, that was a great interview with Kimberly. Really appreciate her coming on the show. Now we're into the panel portion of the show where we have our very own Barb Freeberg. Hey, Barb.
Hello, everybody.
Good to have you on. And we also have our very own Doug Hagren. Hey, Doug.
Hey Kirk, how you doing today? Having a good one? Yeah.
Doing
Are
great.
you are you do you have a house that's sold or bought now?
I'll know in a few days, Doug. Thank you for
Good
bringing
luck
that
to
up.
you.
Yep, hopefully. Cross my fingers. We'll find out in the next few days. Um, so Barb, so tell me, what are some of your thoughts from the interview? What are some of your takeaways?
Loved it. I may be one of the only people that loves talking about planning, and that includes planning everything, even death, even estate planning. And in fact, I am in the thick of preparing everything for my family so they know what to do when I'm not here.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you love it, Barb. You might be the only one. You can take all of our love because I don't love it, but it's a necessary evil, as they say. Doug, what about you? What are some of your takeaways from the interview?
Well, she has a incredible story. If I've got, the background, correctly with, with her dental practice and and what she went through with family and of course, with her, with her own personal issues before moving into the grief counseling, civil mediation, the stuff that she's gone through. I mean, this is how you build conversation. This is how you create someone that can be an expert in a field, is because there's nothing more impactful than authenticity. And I actually know someone who was in a very similar situation with regards to the fingers, the nerve damage, actually having someone who had to change their another dentist had to change their entire career for having issues with hands. So to me, it hit home because of a number of different things, which I can get more into, just to kind of where I live, stories that you hear about, legacy situations that are not, where there's, a ton of loose ends, but also the path that led her to where she is today actually reflects people that I know and situations that I've been through.
Nice. So, Barb, obviously it's kind of like a heavy topic. I know you like planning, but it's heavy. But how should people be thinking about this? Because, it's in my experience, this is one of the most hated topics to talk about. People know they need to do it. They don't want to. It's like you got to twist people's arm to get them to do something they know they need to do. How should people be thinking about this?
Well, I understand both sides, despite the fact that I really don't have the emotion around it and I don't mind talking about it. My husband, on the other hand, does not want to think about it, does not want to talk about it. And frankly, how do you get people to do it? I think people have to come to a realization that this is going to happen and that you are helping and serving your loved ones by being prepared. And I found when discussing this issue, I'm in the midst of creating all the documents because in our family, we all have our jobs, and my job is the finances and my job is the household management. And I do that. Nobody else in my family does that. And so if I don't make the appropriate records for, my husband, my daughter to follow when I'm gone, everything's going to be in a mess. And so back to your question, how do you discuss it? I would frame it in a way of how can I help my loved ones the best to make their lives better and easier when we get to that point, which without a doubt, nobody avoids it, when we get to the point where we are at the end.
Yeah. So, Doug, what about you? What are some takeaways that people can be thinking about in your experience?
Well, but first of all, kind of like Barb, I'll say this as well. This has been a topic of conversation that my wife and I have been having, and she's been pressing me. So good news, we're on the same page to get some resolution there. And it's very difficult for a lot of people to go through this conversation because it is a fact that many people struggle to face their own mortality. They don't want to think about it. It's not just it's not, some of it is that's just so far off, I'll deal with it now. Or I'll deal with it later. And that is a case. And that's a case with a lot of people when it comes to planning in general, right? It's why, in the college planning world that I do, it tends to pique interest faster than retirement planning because retirement planning, I got, that's a soft close, right? It's like I can move that date. End of life planning, it's a soft close. You can't really move that date. It's coming either way, but in their minds, it's not like, oh, I know. And I have some questions that I asked that are tied into this that I think are really powerful in the engagement. I'll come back to that in a bit. But from the aspect of this conversation, it's not just about procrastination for time's sake. A lot of times it's procrastination for emotion's sake. It is especially, and I'll say this, I think, particularly from a male perspective, it is incredibly difficult to face that mortality. I see a lot more concern and interest in tightening those loose ends when I'm talking to women than I am with men. And again, it could be just my observation, but I find that there is something about the irony that we tend to live a shorter lifespan, and women tend to be the ones that are left with kind of dealing with that estate. But men particularly struggle to talk about this. And I think that there is probably some sort of an aspect of ego that goes involved. I'm the caretaker. I don't want to think about if I'm not taking care of my family anymore for a number of reasons. But my father passed away at 53 years old. And he passed away with a very loosely built estate. He did have a will, but he actually let $1 million life insurance policy lapse 2 months before, 2, 3 months before he died, because he had actually had decided. He told the agent, he's like, I'm working on some other things. Well, that never came to fruition. He also had another life insurance policy that he collateralized to a building that he bought. So after it paid out, the mortgage got that policy as well. He had a business with 140 employees right after Y2K that had taken on $1 million+ in debt in order to try to take care of some employees that he didn't want to lay off. So he was kind of like just going outside of his business mind, personal mind. I mean, it was totally empathetic, but when he passed away, the bank was all over that, and the bank kind of, I think, was shocked that this occurred, and it left a real mess. And of course, at that point, they were just like a viper in a pit. They were just ready to pounce because they wanted their money back. And it left, I mean, I can just summarize. It was $250,000 in the legal fees to settle the state. There were business loose ends, and the businesses really suffered in a way that they never fully recovered. There was, obviously my sister. This is one of the stories I tell in college, but my sister was a freshman, had just finished her freshman year in college, and he was cash flowing it. So we didn't know how we were going to get the next 3 years. And then on top of all of that, just the way things were kind of laid out in terms of how the life insurance and was used for this and that, and ultimately it took 5 years to settle the estate. I'm a living, walking story of why this is so critical, that people take this seriously. And I got a number of other more celebrity type of situations that also exemplify this. I'll leave it with this before I pass it back. It is one of the most selfless things you can do if you care about your family, is to really think through, if I was gone tomorrow, what would they need to what would they have to do? Like, I was literally uncovering stones, turning things over, trying to figure out where things are. There was no clear path whatsoever. I thought everything was great. I remember a conversation with him where he's like, hey, Doug, if something ever happens to me, I want you to know that, I've got things buttoned up, we're all set. I'm like, great, Dad. Wasn't the case. I think it's, writing a letter to your family, ahead of time is a great recommendation, where you talk about, if I'm not here, this letter gets published. This is what I want you to know about who you are and what I think. And lining and tying up these loose ends is so critical, because I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old. If something happened to my wife and me, I mean, yeah, sure, we've got an old will, we've got an old trust, we've got family members who could take over, but to ask them to try to figure out what to do and where things are is an absolutely monumental task. That is, I was 25 and I'm still scarred by it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Doug. I think it's definitely challenging when you kind of go through this with, parents. I know when I was growing up, I think I was 10, my father brought me to an attorney's house where he did the will and all that. And I was 10. I don't remember. Like, I remember generally where the guy lived, but the guy was old. He was probably like, he's 65, probably 70, and well, he's not around. And my dad passed, like, I knew before, it was like 5-10 years before that, he said, there's no will. I was like, what about this? He's like, no, there's no will. I just discounted that. And he's an attorney, so I don't know what he did with it, but it was so old, it wouldn't have been relevant anyway. But either way, like, we couldn't find it. And then everyone's pointing fingers like, you have it, you have it. And it's like, he told me there was no will. So that caused friction, right? Anytime these things happen, you have friction. You don't have an explanation. Like, he died suddenly. Like, it was an accident, he died, and, we didn't have explanations. So we had questions, and people started pointing fingers at each other. And so, why didn't this happen? What's this? What's this? Where's this? I'm like, I don't know. Like, when people die, they don't, it's, frequently it's suddenly, and then you don't know what you don't know. Like, when my kids are younger, I would not go on vacation with just me and my wife without the kids, because I was afraid something happened to us. What's going to happen to the kids? Because we didn't have family that could take care of them. And that was, it's like that was our biggest concern. Like, who's going to watch the kids? We don't have that. Some people have huge families and they'll figure it out, but we didn't have a safety net. And so that was always my concern. Is like, if we all die together, then whatever. But if we die and the kids, it's like, I'm very concerned about that. And it's hard. It's hard to think through these things because you're invincible, right? You believe that you're on top of the world and you live forever. I mean, I got another 100 years in me, so I'm fine. But but for the rest of you that aren't going to live another 100 years, it's challenging, right? It's challenging to think through, like, what does death look like? And I think the biggest challenge is the empathy required. Like, you're trying to put yourself in the position of, you've already died, what's going to happen? Who's going to do what? And you're strategizing about what's going to happen. Like, all right, well, most likely people are going to fight over X. All right, how do we button that up? What's going to happen in this case? What's going to happen in this case? You got to do all the things, all the normal things, the durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, all that. But really thinking through other parts. Like, who do you want watching your kids? Like, I've got a father-in-law who's a great guy, but he's older. Like, he could do it, but based on his age, like, I don't know. Like, you get to a point where it's like, all right, well, you need a second and a third and a fourth. Like, you need other options because you don't know. And when it truly comes down to it, some people might back out or say, "Oh, I've got too much going on." And, so you don't know, right? And I think the hard part is you're trying to think through all the different avenues of what could happen, and you're trying to put it in the most suitable way possible. And like you said, Doug, if you have businesses, I mean, some businesses are set up so they can run without you, and those are well-run businesses. That's a business that's saleable. But for most people, they got their own practice. You got your own CPA practice, your own law firm. That's worth zero. Zero. Because without you, it's not worth anything. So I think things like that are tough. You mentioned the dentist. I've worked with a few dentists, and disability is one of the most common challenges that they focus on, because if something happens to them, they can't do their work anymore. And it's all relying upon them and their back and their hands, and get carpal tunnel or something else, and like, they're done. So I think a lot of that stuff is just thinking through, and it's hard because no one wants to admit, oh, I need disability or I need life insurance. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to get disabled. But what if you do? I met a woman once. She did long-term care insurance. That was her specialty. And she had a kid who did half pipe on snowboard. And she's like, I got long-term care on my kid. It was cheap, and I got it because, I mean, what is it going to take for him to do something stupid, land on his neck, and he's paralyzed, and now I got to take, he's got to get taken care of. So I found that to be interesting. I never heard anyone talk about that, but I was like, that's interesting to think through that. But I do think that the death conversation is really hard. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit, and the empathy required is really hard for people, especially if you haven't gone through it with like a parent or someone in the family. So, I don't know, Barb, from your perspective, I mean, have you seen anything interesting in your experience, either personally or professionally, that I think would be a good example from people to learn from?
For me, I've been through the death of both my parents and both my in-laws. And there were, small glitches. I wouldn't say there were any enormous problems. But for me, I felt like the attitude that I learned from my parents, which is be magnanimous, you know, don't be nitpicky. And so when I was negotiating, there's me and my sister, when I was negotiating with my sister over this or that, yeah, maybe I wanted it, but I'm not going to be etched in stone about anything because it's not too much. I don't want to ruin my relationship with my sister. That's what matters. We've each got our quirks. And so, from my perspective, it was easier to let things go than to dig in hard and fast. And we did that both when my parents died and when my husband's parents died. There were certain things we thought was not particularly equitable, but we felt like, look, we have what we need. And none of this stuff is worth making a fight over. So we made the choice that we're just not going to make a big deal out of these small differences. I've seen it tear up in my family. Two siblings who really, over the death of their parents and a few odds and ends, they're not as close as they used to be. So that's how I dealt with it. And we talk about it sometimes even subsequently. And we're like, look, things weren't necessarily fair, but our relationships are intact with our family. We have enough. And so we can live with feeling like, we made the decisions that worked out best.
Yeah. No, it's interesting how I've said this in the show before, but I've only seen one occasion in my entire career of a family not tearing itself apart over a death. One time. And the mother who died didn't have much money and everyone else was fine. And they were the only family I've ever seen actually do it right. And it's really hard. It's it's really hard. I have not seen many examples of this. And I've been through it personally and had, lots of conflicts over death. It's a reason for people to go at each other is really what it is. And the unspoken, the unresolved issues tend to be resolved on the battlefield after the death, right? It's like, well, you did this to me and I'm going to take it out on you. They don't say that, but that's basically what happens. And, and if there's something that's not resolved, everyone else, I always say this, someone every time thinks there's gold buried in the basement and someone else took it every single time. It's just the truth of it. It's unfortunate, but that's the truth of it. And if there's not a will, someone else thinks someone else took it. I could say there is no will because that's what he told me, and I could know there's no will because I know my dad. People still think there's a will. They think someone took it. It's just the reality. Like, you can't convince them otherwise. There is nothing you can't prove a negative, right? It doesn't exist. Well, prove to me. How do I prove it doesn't exist? And I think that's part of the challenge, right? Is sometimes things come up. Well, this is this. Okay, it's not, but you can go look for it. Go look for it. See if you find it. I don't care. I know it's not there, but go look for it if it makes you happy. But I think the reality is there's this void that's created. And especially with families, when the void is the connector, sometimes there's somebody that's the glue. They glue all the family together. And when that person dies, everyone gets unglued. And I think that's a challenge too. Doug, what about you? What are some interesting examples of estates and deaths? I know you mentioned you had one.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to add that I was very fortunate that my sister, who was 18 at the time, was extremely patient and understanding through this, and we had a great, solid relationship to where she's like, Douglas, you deal with it, got it. I was in Ohio at the time. I can get into the tax issues. By the way, I had to sell that building that was collateralized for and write a check at closing for something like almost 100 grand because we had to sell it to liquidate to pay the debt to the bank. And my uncle was in North Carolina at the time, and Ohio had a pickup tax. I mean, again, the stories just continue. I think we ended up writing, and this was back in the time where we didn't have the $14 million estate, ish a level. I mean, we were writing checks and basically making cash out of assets. And this used to be the old horror story. So, but speaking of those horror stories, there's a lot of them around, and there's some great names of some people that you kind of resonate a little bit, right? So she didn't sugarcoat her own hardships. She turned them into tools for healing, resilience, and legacy. Um, I'm right here in Minnesota, and actually, she's right here in Minnesota. Her daughter has a law firm that she's a part of. She's right down, right not that far. I guess, the state planning thing. It's too bad it's too bad that some of these celebrities didn't listen. And one of the greatest examples of how not to plan or what happens when you don't plan is Prince. Okay, when Prince died, his estate dispute became a cautionary tale screaming, "Get your affairs in order before it's too late." He died without a will. Intestacy laws kicked in. The courts, not his wishes, decided who got what. He refused to say what he wanted for his estate. But at the same time, he was very particular about what he believed for his music. He wouldn't market his music. He wouldn't let it use for advertising. And yet he didn't put anything in his estate to protect against that. There was 6 years of courtroom drama, millions in legal fees, fading family relationships. His estate was valued at 82 million, but the IRS thought it was closer to 163 million. That led to a massive tax headache. Some siblings sold rights to primary wave, fracturing control of his legacy. Things got messy really fast. No will equals no control. Trusts are even better. Courts and state make the decision. So ultimately, there was public squattables. There's hefty taxes and fragmented control. Now, if we get outside of my state borders, I can give you other examples. Aretha Franklin, three conflicting handwritten wills when she died in 2018. Sons fought for years over what she really wanted. That's one of the biggest issues. It's not just the money. It's like, but he wants this, or he wanted this. Who knows? Because they're not there to say it anymore. One son eventually prevailed after a handwritten note was found on a couch. She left her family in discord. James Brown, another one, the godfather of soul, battle for his $100 million estate took 15 years. There were lawsuits between family, trustees, and charities, delayed scholarships he had intended to fund for poor children. Jimi Hendrix died with no will. His relatives and step-relatives fought over control of his music rights. His father finally got it after years. Howard Hughes, his estate was worth billions and it was tied up in 200 plus people claiming to be heirs. It took more than 30 years to resolve. Pablo Picasso, 30 million in assets, billions in today's value. 6 years, over 60 attorneys, $30 million in fees, nearly the value of the entire state itself just to settle it. And last one I'll throw out is Heath Ledger. He had a will, but he failed to update it after his daughter was born. That will left everything to his parents and his sisters and unintentionally left his daughter with nothing. Thankfully, Kirk, you were talking about the story of doing the right thing. The family actually gave the estate to his daughter, but only because they chose to. So this one actually had a happy ending. By the way, some people will Google out there. There's been some marketing I've seen from time to time about how J.P. Morgan's estate was a mess. Actually, unlike Picasso, Prince, and Aretha, he actually prepared extensively, very detailed, deliberate, designed to preserve wealth and influence. He passed down almost $80 million. Think of what that's worth now in the billions. He used trusts to direct wealth over generations, ensuring his heirs had resources without free rein to squander it. It protected his assets, reinforced his legacy as a dynasty. It bequeathed major art collections, books, assets to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Morgan Library in New York. It reinforced his reputation as a cultural patron, not just a financier. And he carefully chose successors, both family and business. His son, J.P. Morgan Jr., inherited not just money, but control of the Morgan Bank, keeping the empire intact. And by the way, that Morgan Bank, still around. They merged with Chase and became the largest bank, if not the largest bank in the world. Again, there's contrasting situations here. Courts deciding, siblings fighting, taxes skyrocketing, legacy diluted. Or you can have, as you put it, Kirk, empathy, smooth transfer, reduced taxes, legacy institutions created. Prince left his estate to probate courts, and J.P. Morgan left it to his posterity.
Yeah, that's great. So we're gonna we're going to wrap this up in the interest of time, but appreciate everybody's input here. Barb, final thoughts that you can leave the listeners with.
So here's what you can do today to avoid the catastrophes that Doug so clearly outlined. Make it a priority. Speak with an estate planning attorney if you've got a sizable estate. If not, go online. At least create a will. And then make a written record of what your wishes are. You need, first of all, a healthcare directive. You need a power of attorney. You can create those forms online or hire an attorney to do that. Then you need a listing of what you have and how to access it. It's not fun to do. I've been working on our family's documents for over 6 months. But when it's done, at least for a while. And you'll save so many people heartaches when you die. So, on that note, I am Barbara Friedberg. You can find me on YouTube and at Barbara Friedberg Personal Finance.
Thanks for coming on, Barb. And Doug, final thoughts from you.
Hey, Kirk. You know what Dr. Harms reminded us today is that legacy doesn't just happen. It's built by preparation. And when there's no plan, chaos takes over. Just ask Prince's family. Years of fighting, millions wasted, a legacy decided by the courts instead of him. Although I'll say it did end up creating a wonderful museum out of Paisley Park. The same thing happens with money, whether it's retirement, college, or protecting your family's future. Failing to plan always costs more, both in dollars and in peace of mind. And one more thing that people often overlook, it's not just about money. It's about values. One more thing that I want to add is my wife is Catholic. I'm not. And the little things like that can matter a lot when you're talking about decisions that shape your family's future. She asks me all the time, what's going to happen with us, right? What's the plan here? And if you don't talk them through and plan for them, they can turn into conflict at the worst possible time. At Mergent College Advisors, our job is simple. We help families avoid overpaying for college so they can protect their wealth, honor their values, and keep their future secure. Because just like in retirement, you don't want to dig into the wrong bucket at the wrong time. It can throw everything off balance. So if you're ready to take control instead of leaving it to chance, visit mergentadvisors.net. That's MERGENT, mergentadvisors.net, or specifically for college, mergentcollegeadvisors.com. Because preparation isn't just about money, it's about protecting your family's future, your legacy, and what matters most to you.
Yeah, thanks again for coming on, Doug. That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.